afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Dave Deptula, Dean of the Mitchell Institute for Aerospace Studies, and welcome to today's Aerospace Nation. I think as everyone out there knows, the Indo-Pacific stands at the center of global geopolitics today, presenting both unprecedented challenges as well as opportunities for the United States and our allies. In recent years, we've witnessed a rapidly evolving security environment in the region, the rise of China as a pure competitor, North Korea's advancing missile and nuclear programs, and growing political tensions, geopolitical tensions, have all contributed to an increasingly complex Pacific environment. At the same time, our air power partnerships in the region, technological advancements, and innovative operational concepts are propelling the Air Force into the center of joint operations in the Pacific. Discussions about military power in Indo-Pacific frequently highlight the Navy because 70% of the region is covered by water. But as I've been reminding people for decades now, 100% of Indo-Pacific is covered by air and space. So today I'm really pleased to have General Schneider, the commander of Pacific Air Forces, join me to discuss what PACAF has been up to in the region. So General Schneider, thanks so much for taking this time after some busy and hectic travel to talk with us. And before we dive into our discussion, what I'd like to do is offer you some time to make some opening remarks. So I'll shake the stick and it's over to you.
Hey, General Deptula, thank you, and I appreciate this opportunity to link up with you again, and certainly to talk with the expanded audience here. We've been trying to do this for a while, and as you kind of alluded to, my schedule is a little bit challenging at time with all that is going on out here. But yeah, you certainly you touched on a little bit on the challenges, and I think the Q&A will draw more out on that, and I don't necessarily want to lead with that, but I guess as we certainly recognize the challenges posed by the regimes in Beijing, Moscow, Pyongyang, continue to have more and more impacts out here, which ramps up the challenges. But on the flip side of that coin is there is a lot of impressive work that continues to go on. And I guess to your question about what are we doing in PACAF, I'd like to talk about the three asymmetric advantages that we enjoy. One of those is the growing strength of and capacity of our allies and partners in the region. Through all of the bad behavior that we see, and particularly out of Beijing, there are a lot of doors that continue to be open for us with allies and partners, whether it's expansion of existing relationships or being able to start relationships we didn't think that we were going to have maybe 5, 7, 10 years ago. I also, look at the advantage of the professionalism of our people. We are a highly disciplined, highly skilled, highly professional force, not only in the United States Air Force, but the partner air forces with our allies and partners and the joint force as a whole, and which leads into the third one, which is the inherent strength of the U.S. joint force. We have been doing this. We have been a joint force team for decades. We have been fighting. We have been deterring. We know how to do this. So, I am encouraged. I see a tremendous amount of optimism as I look at those three advantages, the growing network of allies and partners, the professionalism of our people, and then the strength of the joint force to be able to stay ahead of the challenges, however they manifest themselves through the region. And certainly a lot more I can go into detail on any one of those. But again, thank you for the opportunity to be doing this today.
You bet. Well, thanks for that brief overview. Let's jump in and discuss some of these topics in a bit more detail. And for those of you in the audience, don't worry, I'll be sure to leave plenty of time for your questions. So we talked a little bit about how the security landscape in the Indo-Pacific has undergone significant changes over the past few decades. As someone who has a lot of time in the Pacific and now in the position of the PACAF commander, what do you see as the critical shifts in the region's security environment? And along with that, just how are you adapting the Pacific Air Forces to those changes?
Yeah, General Deptula, great question. I guess if one word to describe it, I would say interconnected. So from the time my first assignment here in the theater was in 1990, focused on DPRK. We were not talking about China. We're not necessarily talking about the Soviet Union, which was on the verge of collapse, back when I first showed up at, Osan Air Base in Korea. But fast forward to today in 2024, everything is more interconnected, and we certainly see that play out. Because of that, I think it is more dangerous and certainly more volatile. And there's greater potential for opportunism amongst malign actors around the world, whereas where an event could happen in Ukraine or in Israel and Gaza, and others will take advantage of that as we are. The world community is focused on dealing with one challenge or another. So I say that it's just not a regional challenge that we face. It is a global interconnected challenge. And maybe, to some of that, we talk a little bit about, what's going on in Ukraine. And while, thousands and thousands of miles away, we see, Russia obviously as a primary player there, but now the DPRK continuing to send equipment, troops, and become more and more involved in that. We see, the PRC in Russia, continuing to do more with each other, with long-range aviation events in the theater, both, going towards Alaska. We just had a recent one, in the vicinity of the Sea of Japan. We also see, continued, connections with Iran, China's relationship or their need for fossil fuels. So for things that are going on in the CENTCOM AOR, how that continues to play or have an impact out here. So again, it is a time of great consequence, not only for the region, but for the world. And I'll focus a little bit on those that are maybe closer to home. So DPRK, the challenge of that threat that I was focused on back in 1990, which was primarily, a massive humanity and an armor and an infantry and a artillery threat at the time, has now evolved into a ballistic missile, a long-range ballistic missile, ICBM capable nuclear threat, which we can never take our eye off of. And we saw that with a recent ICBM test out of the DPRK a few months ago. Russia, as I alluded to, is doing more and more in the long-range aviation space, whether by themselves or doing that with China. And we just watched the 9th, combined bomber patrol, take place over the last over the long weekend, long holiday weekend. So more continues to play out in that space. But through all of that, the greatest geopolitical challenge we face comes from the PRC and from the PLA. And not only is it the growth in capacity and capability of the PLA, it's the behaviors that go along with that. And so General Bronner, the CHOD in the Philippines, uses the phrase ICAD, or the illegal, coercive, aggressive, and deceptive behaviors that go along with it. The bullying that is manifest, with that growth in capability continues to play out time and time again. We see it in the Philippines. We see it around Second Thomas Shoal. We see that around Sabina Shoal. Most of it in the maritime domain, but it occurs in other places as well. In the air domain, we look at what the PLA does in and around Taiwan, especially since President Lai's inauguration back in May. It's about a 300% increase in the number of air defense identification zone incursions that the PLA Air Force is doing in and around Taiwan on a daily basis. And that has been a pretty steady ramp since the May inauguration. Again, talked about the combined bomber patrols, and the one last week, particular concern or note, involved H-6N, with N being a nuclear capable bomber that now China is continuing to do more and more with, and using that to project power. And as well, the PLA had their first ICBM test into into the Pacific, into the South Pacific, something that they had not done since the 1980s. So we continue to watch all of that, and it continues to be a concern, again, with the interconnectedness of what all these actors in the region and other parts of the world continue to do. But I'll fall back into that what gives me optimism, in this movie that can potentially look bad on the surface, but what continues to give me optimism are those three asymmetric advantages: allies and partners, the strength of our force, and then the strength of the joint force. Over.
No, that's great. It's a wonderful segue into this next area I wanted to get your perspectives on, and and you alluded to it in your opening remarks, the increased reckless actions by China, especially in unprofessional air and maritime encounters. So what is it that you and your PACAF command are doing to counter these kinds of provocations?
Another great question. I may back up just a little bit on that. And a particular concern is, a lot of these aggressive, malign behaviors aren't necessarily directed towards the United States forces. They're directed towards our partners and allies. So it is clearly, an effort to get after the fabric of the alliances and partnerships that give us strength. And we have seen that with unprofessional, unsafe actions towards Canadian aircraft, towards Australian aircraft, what happens in the Philippines, both in the maritime domain and in the air domain, recent events in Japan in violation of their air defense identification zone. So it continues to play out, as well as activities with U.S. forces. What we do, is we need to call out this bad behavior. To be a responsible actor on the world stage, which China has said that they are, they have got to show that they can do this. If they operate safely, if they operate professionally, within international norms, we do not have concerns about that. But they show time and time again that they do not. So when that happens, we call them out. And recently the Philippines just called them out for bad behaviors in and around Sabina Shoals. Aside from doing that, through diplomatic channels, through informational channels, we also seek to have, strong mill-to-mill dialogues, one of those being MMCA, or the Military Maritime Consultative Agreement, which is our ability twice a year to sit down with U.S. forces and PLA forces and to put on the table, those events that we felt, violated those international norms of safe and professional behavior. But again, it is a testament to our forces, again, whether it's air forces or whether it's the forces that operate in our other services and that of our allies and partners, that we continue. There is a difference between how we operate day in and day out, how we conduct our business, that I think sets a clear example to others, the values that we hold and the things that we do and why we do them differently. Over.
No, thanks very much for that. I mean, I summarize as setting an example through professional behavior, and then hopefully holding others accountable as a result. Let's shift gears just a little bit, but still related to the PRC challenges, and that's that it's no secret that the air and missile defense challenges that they pose put missile defense in high demand. It's also a very low density capacity right now for our forces. It's not just an Air Force problem. We all recognize that. It affects everyone. Could you share some of your thoughts on the types of capabilities and capacity that you'd like to see in theater?
I guess the short answer is more. As we all, in the bold statement of the obvious, is that Beijing and others have certainly watched how we have conducted combat operations in the past. Desert Shield, Desert Storm, Operation Iraqi Freedom, where we've had the ability to bring power, to bring forces into theater over a period of time, to get to a level that we desire, and then to be able to initiate an operation, or to do to fight the fight that is presented to us, at a time and place of our choosing when we have advantages in place. Beijing has taken that lesson from that, as have others, and they have continued to build out a ballistic missile force, that challenges our access to the region. And every day, those missiles grow, and that missile capability from the PLA, grows in number, capability, and range. They're not the only ones. The DPRK is doing this as well, and those continue to not only challenge the Republic of Korea, but also Japan. But I'll focus a little bit more on the PRC challenges. You highlighted it earlier. It is a huge theater. I mean, it's 52% of the Earth's surface. It is 100 million, square miles. That is a lot of room for which we have responsibility, and in which we need to operate. Can't cover it all necessarily, so we have to have, as much capability that is agile, that is movable, that can move with our forces, to wherever it is needed around the region. And I believe it takes a layered approach. And there are things that host nations and sovereign governments like those in Korea and Japan can provide. There are things that we, the United States military, need to provide that are perhaps maybe a little bit more agile, a little bit more expeditionary. But all of it is connected. It is connected through a C2 architecture and all the data and battle management capabilities that go along with it that have to be shareable amongst allies and partners. We're not going to field all the radars that we want. We're not going to field necessarily all the shooters and all the interceptors that we want, but we have to have agile enough architectures that bring all of this together. I guess specifically within the U.S. military, and I look at the joint force, the way the Air Force and the Army project power is through land or off the land, whereas the Navy and the Marine Corps will project it from the maritime domain. So there is a lot of overlap, I think, in what the U.S. Army and the U.S. Air Force needs to do. And I am very optimistic about that dialogue. And we recently had an Agile combat employment, which is how the Air Force looks to do agile combat operations through the archipelagic region that is the Western Pacific, and multi-domain operations, which is basically the Army's doing of the same with the same geography. There's a lot of overlap there. We're probably eyeing the same pieces of real estate when we conduct operations. There's a lot that we can bring together, whether it's offensive fires, whether it's defensive fires, base defense, logistics, and sustainment. So, and I give credit to my predecessor, Ken Wilsbach, who had the first dialogue on this, and then I recently had one with Charlie Flynn, the outgoing USARPAC commander, to have a summit to figure out, all right, where are we going? How would we like to operate? What are the capabilities that each of our forces brings, so that we're not trying to solve this problem independently. We can solve it jointly. And by doing that, I believe that the two of us, and now, General Ron Clark, the new USARPAC commander, and I can go back to our respective services to go, all right, this is how we're solving the problem out here. These are the kind of we can inform the dialogues that are happening back in the E-ring of the Pentagon. And that is not to say that the Navy and the Marine Corps and others don't have a voice in this. That is not the case. This is a joint force problem to solve. But I think right now, the Army and the Air Force have probably got the most overlap in terms of how we move, how we shoot, move, and communicate, and to fight the fights that our nation asks us to get after. Over.
Yeah, no, very much appreciated. Again, good segue to agile combat employment. As you mentioned and described, it's obviously gained significant traction in recent years. Could you talk a bit about how this concept has evolved since its inception, and what do you see as the next steps in refining ACE for the Indo-Pacific?
Yeah, I'm smiling because I first came to this headquarters, obviously in a different role back in 2015, and I remember that was one of the first conversations that the PACAF A58 had, was about agile combat employment, and certainly it was based off of a recognition of the growing ballistic missile threat that others in the region were fielding, and the challenges to our ability for access, basing, and overflight, and how we were going to, need to modify our thinking, and get away from bases per se and go to places and learn how to be able to operate in smaller packages, to how to be able to move around. All based on the thought that airplanes are far more survivable in the air than they are on the ground. And so to get away from some of the big large scale bases, to move out to spokes that were very austere, to be able to do quick turns of fuel and munitions, to get them back in the air, to disaggregate for protection of the force, and then reaggregate quickly for lethality against an enemy force. There is a tremendous amount of work that has been done. Again, coming back into this, 8-9 years later, the wings, the men and women, at the unit level have done a tremendous amount to figure out what light means. What does our kit look like? What is, no kidding, what are those minimum essential items that we need to put on C-130s and move around, and what to operate F-22s, F-35s, F-16s, F-15s? No kidding, what is the stuff that is just the bare bones minimum? And then how do we train our airmen, to be able to do that? And a lot of that comes with making risk decisions, how to train our people to operate in small groups, lower levels. Sometimes, an 04 or an 03 is making, command decisions with all that have been delegated down. We have, E8s, E7s, and E6s that, again, we're putting down, a lot of, risk management decisions at their levels. How do we train them to do that? How do we train them to understand, what are the right risk decisions to make? What are the ones that aren't? So it's a long way of saying we have really advanced and we have really evolved. And I'm really pleased. And anytime I go out to see an Agile combat employment exercise, that we are getting after that. The other thing the team here is doing, since the time that I showed up, is we've gone back to challenge all the initial assumptions, which I think is healthy to do. The world, or at least the regional situation, world situation since 2015 has changed a lot. So for those initial assumptions, in terms of the places we thought we'd be able to get into, let's go back and revisit them. Perhaps some of the doors that we assumed were closed a few years ago, not closed. They're swinging open. So let's figure out ways, are we able to get into places that we didn't think we could go to, and be able to posture or pre-position or think about operating in different locations. I'll say the one thing that maybe not lacking, but we've recognized we need to get after this, and I give General Minahan, the former AMC commander, tremendous credit, was there's a logistics and large-scale logistics and sustainment piece of this that wasn't necessarily connected. And that's because a lot of our Agile combat employment evolutions have been done, within wing training budgets through within wing training cycles. But with Mobility Guardian 23 last summer, with Air Mobility Command, moving into the theater at scale to start to stress, test, and to assess what they are able to do from the mobility piece, I think was really valuable. So when we look forward to 2025 and the RE4 pack exercise, now we're putting all of this together, all the things that we're doing at unit level in austere locations, and the large scale mobility machine that enables that going forward.
Yeah, great segue, because my next follow-on question was, or is, do you believe you've got enough airlift to make the whole ACE construct viable and one that can work? And I think I can predict part of your answer is going to be it depends. But anyway, over to you. You need more airlift?
I'm laughing because I'm trying to think of the commander across the joint force that would say that they have enough airlift or enough lift, period. Again, this is another Mike Minahanism that I will probably slaughter, but he uttered it a year or two ago. He goes, I'll never admit to being ready enough, integrated enough, or agile enough. So if I could paraphrase and do my best, Mike Minahan, is I will never admit to having enough airlift or log and sustainment. And that is in no way, a knock on the mobility community writ large. I look back at my own evolution. I never got out of a sortie or jumped out of a jet thinking, yeah, I'm tactical enough, I'm ready enough, I've got everything I need, and I'm prepared enough. And I think that's just the hunger that we have as airmen, just to recognize that we We must continue to stay ahead of the challenge. We cannot be reactive. We have to be proactive, and we have to continue to evolve. So again, I really applaud what the mobility community is doing. And I'll also say it's maybe not just an airlift solution. It's an archipelagic region. There are sea lift solutions. The Army has watercraft. The Navy has capability. And then within the island chains, there are also land transportation solutions. So this is really a joint force effort for agile combat employment to work. It is not going to, I think everybody races to the vision of a C-130 putting pallets all over the place. That is certainly a key enabler. But there's a lot of other assets and capabilities that put kit where we need it that are not necessarily C-130s.
Yeah, and I was going to jump in and add that there are also some very unique thinking going on out there to use uninhabited aerial vehicles to contribute, maybe not with the same payload capacity as a 130 C-17 or C-5, but if you're talking about austere operating locations, those two might. So got it. Understand your comments about what the mobility community is doing, but also at some point, we do need the resources to get the job done.
No, absolutely. And I am with you. And I'll, you pick a widget, the flux capacitor on, don't necessarily need a dedicated, airlift sortie to move, one part, between a hub and spoke. Are there other ways to get it there? Unmanned aerial vehicles and others are certainly a solution and a cost-effective one for us, to move, individual parts and things that are mission critical, but maybe we need the bigger platform to do other things. Over.
Yeah, before we get off this topic and move into a broader discussion on logistics, I just wanted to make the observation. I just got back from a visit to Kyiv in Ukraine, talking with their military leadership, large part of that time being with their Air Force leadership. And it's an interesting observation. And I know that your sister command in Europe is working hard to glean some of these lessons. But the Ukrainian Air Force has come under attack by the Russians with very sophisticated weapons and density of attack for almost 3 years in a row now, and not one of their airfields have been shut down. There's just it's more difficult than people think to shut down an airfield. The reason I bring this up is not because, and certainly I'm in favor of ACE, but we can't just throw out the notion of, every air base that comes under attack, all of a sudden in the first 24 hours, it's going to be finished, because that's not the case. And we have real world evidence of that, as we've seen in Ukraine. So let's move on to go ahead.
If I could, you're spot on. And that's one of the challenges that the team has gone back to. One of the assumptions the team has gone back to look at, and I think one of the lessons, in terms of maybe it's, micro mobility or, micro ACE, do we have to move to a different airfield? Can we move to a different part of an airfield? We make a lot of assumptions about runway length. We also have, capable airplanes that can operate on shorter runway lengths. There's a reason that we strive for 8 and 10,000 foot runways in competition or peacetime, for the safety margin. But it goes back to a risk discussion, in conflict or crisis, what are those risk decisions pulled down to a lower level? And then do we feel that we can accept that risk of going off of airfields, and they have a crater in them 4,000 feet down, but I know I can take off and land, over that or short of that, all things that we are continuing to work into the skill set and the thinking of our men and women that do the job. But great points about one unitary warhead on an airfield does not take out an airfield, and we still have the ability to operate and to project combat power.
Yeah, your thoughts remind me of Tom Cruise in Top Gun 2. We saw him take that F-14 off, in what, about 2,500 feet or so? Okay, back to business. Pulling on that logistics thread a bit more, the vast distances of the Pacific obviously present logistical challenges. especially operating under from dispersed bases like we were talking about. So how's PACAF actually working with Transcom to ensure not just the airlift piece, but the more robust logistics support is in place across the entire theater?
A couple pieces of that, and certainly, if there was crisis or conflict, and whether it be a challenge like HADR or whether it's at the high end of the spectrum, um, yeah, logistics and sustainment is key to success, and it's also going to be very challenged. I would say that there is a clear recognition the importance of pre-positioning because of the vast distances, and perhaps there's never enough lift to go around to our earlier conversation. So looking at our ability to pre-position as much forward, again, across the spectrum of what we're asked to do as the United States Air Force, take some of that burden, off of Transcom in time of crisis. That's obviously a funding and a resourcing decision with the United States Air Force to get that pre-po and the kit forward to where we need it. And it's not just the purchasing of it, it's the sustainment of it, it's the warehousing of it to make sure that it's ready to go when we need it to go. And we are making progress on that. And then the conversation with Transcom also involves a conversation with Indo-Pacom as well, because across the joint force, what are the priorities, and for what we need to affect operations. What does the combatant commander determine? We're going to go out and accomplish these objectives. What are the forces we need to do it? And then in priority order, what are those things? What's that demand that we're putting on Transcom to get the right kit, the right people where it needs to be? I would say within all of that, there is still a command and control, perhaps battle management piece that we have to continue to evolve, across the force, knowing where our stuff is, knowing where it is in the pipeline, and how to get it to the right place at the right time. And a lot of that, burden, if you will, is on Indo-Pacom and Transcom to figure out how we have a joint logistics C2, capability that is, responsive, relevant, and operates at the speed of whatever crisis or challenge that we're operating in. Over.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Thank you. Now, you talked a lot in your opening remarks and so far in other discussion we've had, emphasizing the importance of the alliances in the Indo-Pacific. And as you've alluded to, we've seen a revitalization and expansion of many of those relationships. So could you talk a bit about what you believe are some of the most significant developments in those partnerships?
Yeah, if I were to give maybe the short thumbnail overview, it's our existing alliances continue to grow stronger. And again, there's clear-eyed understanding of the dangers posed by actors in the region, whether it be the PRC, the DPRK, or Russia. So we're continuing to do more and more with our allies in the region. I would, on a positive note, we're the Philippines, which is a bilateral treaty ally. We're having conversations and doing more with them than we were 5 to 7 years ago when I was here. And those doors have swung wide open, and we have the ability to take advantage of, the EDCA, the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement sites, and are continuing to do more. Recently, we were doing fighter-to-fighter interaction with their FA-50s and our F-16s. Not the first time that we had done that, and continuing to take advantage of those existing relationships that are growing stronger. The piece that perhaps is maybe more fascinating is that the partnerships around the region and the doors that continue to be open. Before this started, for the larger audience, General Deptula and I were talking about my recent trip to Vietnam. They just purchased T-6 trainer aircraft, and I was able to go out there for the arrival ceremony of the first 5 of the 12 that they are buying. And that is a relationship that if you had asked me in 2015, hey, in 2024, do you think you'd be flying a T-6 into Vietnam? I would have laughed and said, no way. But it's those relationships that continue to give me encouragement, and I see more and more of those happening. Some of that's manifest through bilateral exercises that are now turning into multilateral. Smaller nations that may not have had a strong bilateral relationship with us are getting into the mix by joining other existing relationships and exercises, and we're going from shifting from bilateral events to more multilateral events. And I really give Japan and Australia a tremendous amount of credit for taking existing efforts that they have done and participated with and really opening the doors. One in particular, this summer, every 2 years, the Royal Australian Air Force hosts a pitch black exercise. This year, in 2024, was the largest ever. 20 nations participated, 145 aircraft, 4,500 airmen. And you had from the big, Australia, Japan, United States, to the small. Papua New Guinea brought an aircraft, a single engine airplane used for light mobility support. The Philippines brought FA-50s, the first time they had been outside of their country since, I think, a 1960 UN effort. And the Europeans were there in force. So Germany, France, Italy, Spain, had committed a tremendous amount to the region for 5 to 6 weeks, and pitch black was one of the events. So I realize I'm rambling through all of this. There is a lot going on in this space. And again, it's not just the region, but I think the world sees the importance of the Indo-Pacific and the need to maintain peace and stability. And they are literally committing, their resources, their aircraft, their funding on a consistent basis to ensure the peace and stability out here. And I applaud all of that.
No, I don't. I don't think you're rambling. You answered the question and provide some very insightful information because, as you mentioned at the very beginning, and I use this line more and more frequently nowadays. Back when we fought WW Desert Storm, we had 35 allies, but in all honesty, and they contributed. Absolutely, they contributed. But we had so many assets. We didn't necessarily need everybody. Today, we absolutely need everybody, and they need us. And so it's that growing set of alliances that you discussed, and very insightful with the large recent air exercise that everyone wants to get into, even if they've just got a handful of airplanes. So I think that's very helpful in the context of making our potential adversaries like China think twice before they do something stupid.
Yeah, and two other things that I'll throw out. One is you don't need to look like the United States Air Force to be part of this. Everyone can contribute. And again, I go back to the Papua New Guinea example and to the Philippine example. And the other piece of it is these are relationships built on trust that we have. And a couple of events ago, someone asked me about the growing relationships between Beijing, Moscow, and Pyongyang, and I described them as relationships of convenience. The next piece, which I failed to highlight at that time, but I'll try to highlight now, is that those are not relationships built on trust. I think they're transactional in nature, whereas what we do, and it's not just the United States, it's the like-minded partners, the like-minded allies that come together. And again, whether it's the shared values of sovereignty, respect for governments, respect for governing systems, respect for human rights, transparency, and in our economic systems. That's what brings us together, and I think allows us to have those foundational, trust-built relationships when we get into the mill-to-mill arena.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about readiness. I think our audience is pretty attuned to the fact that over the last 15 years or so, we've seen the impact that the combination of underfunding of the Air Force, becoming too small and too old, has really had on readiness. We've got pilots who are now flying fewer hours per month than any before in history. So what are the Air Force's plans? Not necessarily just PACAF, but maybe if you could give us some insight on what you're hearing about the Air Force's plans to increase flying time.
Yeah, General Datula, some of this is, I think, still to be determined. As we look towards an administration change, I suspect that all services are going to go back and have to redo some POM and budgeting homework. as a new administration comes on board, and I don't want to get too far out in front of that. I my role is to articulate the needs out here, and I continue to do that. Back into the secretary and the chief, and there's again clear understanding of what it is we need, and I truly appreciate the focus that they bring on the Indo-Pacific. At some point it becomes a DoD and a national level conversation about do we have the Air Force that we need? Yeah, and are we funding it to that level? And again, that is for others to have. In terms of readiness, I wear two hats in this job. One is a little bit on the organized, train, and equip side. As the commander of PACAF. And the other is the air component to Indo-Pacom. So I am both the provider and the consumer of readiness at the same time, and it's my job to manage that balance. For all the great things that we do with those exercises, for all the things that we do with Agile combat employment, there's a bit of a cost. And keeping aircraft back at home stations so they can take care of the ready aircrew program tasks and fly the flights, do the simulators, take care of all the training, vice being out there and exercising. There's a little bit of a burn rate or a consumption rate that I have to manage. And Admiral Paparo, the Indo-Pacom commander, is fantastic about having this conversation. He fully understands that. Air Force F-15C pilot that did an exchange with the Ironmen, so he gets it, and I appreciate his understanding and willingness to have these dialogues as we do that. But readiness is key. I have no doubt about the ability of our men and women to do the job, whatever they are asked to do. But I owe it to them, to be able to preserve resources and to be able to be as trained and ready as feasible. For whatever we ask them to do.
Great. I think most folks are pretty cognizant of the fact that effective air power requires stand-in forces that are capable of, as General Alvin recently said, holding a knife to our adversaries' throats. As a component commander, you're closest to the aircraft we'll need to succeed in the future. So could you talk a bit about why advanced penetrating strike and air dominance aircraft are such key tools to ensure victory in any kind of a dust up out there in the Pacific?
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, and I may conflate two things, and I'll try not to do this. Your point about the inside force, and I've been vocal about this in the past. We the Air Force have and I'll call it a moral obligation, one to the joint force, because wherever they are, we are going to be with them, and it is our job to be an integral part of the joint force to deliver fires. And the other is a moral obligation to our allies and partners that General Alvin alluded to. So there is always a need for an inside force. Great. And this is where I'll try to segue the conversation a little bit. When I look at what our nation asks the United States Air Force to do, and again, I am a bit of a knuckle dragger by background, we provide mass fires on the enemy's center of gravity at the time and place of our choosing. And we do it in the air domain. It is what the nation asks us to do. There are a lot, and we bring a capability, especially when it comes to the delivering fires at the time and place of our choosing, that other services and the volume that other services cannot. So for the United States Air Force, we always have to be in a position where we can get into the hardest targets, that we can turn the vertical flank, and that we can deliver mass fires on a center of gravity, whether that is an enemy's fielded force, whether that is command and control nodes or something else. We have always got to be able to deeply penetrate into the hardest target sets and deliver those fires, and that we can not take our eyes off of that. We can talk a little bit more about whether that's air superiority, that's global precision strike. Yes, it's all of the above, but putting mass fires on the enemy center of gravity is job number one for us.
Very good. One more quick one before we go to audience questions, which kind of segues into what you just said. Long-range strike capabilities obviously play a crucial role in power projection as well as deterrence across the Pacific. And just as a little bit, I can't help but making a historic aside here. As the PACAF Director of Operations back in 2004, I was the guy that established the first continuous bomber presence on Guam that was the forerunner of the current bomber task force deployments. Today, how do these deployments enhance deterrence in the Indo-Pacific?
Another great question. I'd say maybe before I do the deterrence, it's the assurance piece. As a nation, we have an extended deterrence. We have extended nuclear deterrence to allies in the region. And by putting bomber task forces in here, that is our visible commitment to upholding our commitments to that extended deterrence. So partners and allies are assured by us doing that. And on the deterrence side, it shows potential adversaries that we can project power from the United States, from Guam, from other locations, again, at the time and place of our choosing. For deterrence, it's, through all of this, that we want to, whatever potential enemies that are out there today, or, others that we can't see that may manifest themselves in the future, that whoever they are, that they wake up and just say, hey, today is not the day that they are going to unilaterally upset the balance, of peace and stability in the region. And the bombers, the physical presence and the manifestation of bomber operations are a huge message in that regard.
Well, very good, and thanks very much for that great discussion, filled full of insights. What I do want to do now is open the session to Q&A from the audience. Most of you are familiar with the drill by now. I'll call on you. When I do, unmute your mic, state your name and affiliation, and you can also submit questions using the Q&A function, which I was going to go to first, but I see we have a hand right off the bat. So let's go to Greg Hadley for the first question. Greg.
Hi, Generals. Thanks for doing this. My question was around reforpack. How's the planning for that going? And is there any chance that the continuing resolutions in Congress could affect your ability to plan for that exercise? Thank you.
Okay, to your question about reforpack, yeah, the planning is going extremely well. My ability to remember times and dates is lacking right now, but last week, I believe, we had our second mid-planning conference on reforpack. I walked into the room for the outbrief, and it was a large number of people, not necessarily from this headquarters, but across the Joint Force, from back in the building and from other parts of the Air Force. So it's going extremely well, and the team has gone to incredible levels of detail. So I'm really optimistic. To your question about funding, yeah, certainly to be determined. And through the course of our planning, we have options. So we take a look at obviously what we would like to do at the high end. If we get all the funding that we are asking for through all of this, to a lower end of the funding, we'll still be able to make this happen at pretty large size and scale. And it's again kind of a TBD in terms of how the funding will flow through all of this. But again, I have optimism because I think it has been well articulated the why as to we're going to do reforpack in 25. Over.
Thank you.
Okay, let's take one from the chat room. This is from Major Joe Bledsoe, who is an Air Force Fellow at the Air Force Academy's Institute for Future Conflict. And Joe asks, as a follow-on to your comments on ACE, do you view ACE as a tactic, an operation, or a strategy? Additionally, how do you foresee implementing an ATO in the ACE environment?
Joe, great question. The short knuckle dragger answer is yes, all of the above. And I think Agile combat employment, when I go out and see how the units operate at a base or an austere location. They're operating at the tactical level. On the operational level, now we're starting to talk about how this headquarters transmits commander's intent and guidance, how we aggregate the power at those individual locations to bring it together, again, time and place of our choosing, to be lethal. And at the strategic level, again, it's our ability to show that we can do this, and reefer pack is a big part of it going forward. Again, that we can operate inside an anti-access area denial environment, and we can be effective. So I think it hits it at all three of those. I'll go back and circle to the operational level. The thing that we're working on right now, and I only blame myself, when I came into this job in February, I really wanted us to explore commander's intent and mission type orders, because I recognize that as great as AOCs or Air Operations Centers are, there is a certain vulnerability to that. And that, as we start a conflict, we are probably in the executing part of our PACE plan already in terms of comms. So I've challenged the team, and we've gone through a couple of refinements of issuing mission type orders from the theater JFAC to go, hey, in the absence of guidance, this is what I expect you to do. We won't get into details because of the classification here. I can share those with you, at a higher classification if you want. But I know for the first iterations, we're not going to be 100% right, but I want us to continue to refine this through the course of exercises. And I want it to be second nature in our thinking and our operation, that we can learn to operate, again, in a contested comms environment, and we can still be lethal and effective. So I think we're making strides there, and I only blame myself for not moving as fast as I would like. Over.
Gumby, I'm partial to Air Force fellows, so here's another one from an Air Force fellow. This one is the Mitchell Institute Air Force fellow, Grant Jargulis, who asks, can you provide your thoughts on air control, specifically the ability and importance of possessing the assets to gain air superiority with the current force, and the importance of solidifying a fifth generation fighter and air battle management capability with E7, an upgraded command and reporting center equipped with a TPY-4?
Grant, I think you know the answer better than I can give it. No, I would say I concur with your thinking in all of this, and I know we can only kind of scratch the surface based on the level of this dialogue, but yeah, I look at it from a sensing piece first. Need the ability to sense and to make sense, certainly in the Western Pacific, and I see a layered approach, both land-based, ground-based systems, air-breathing systems. You probably quote me and others probably cannot get the E7 fast enough. And then others as well, also looking into the space-based architecture as well to see what capabilities exist there. But I see a need for layered redundancy, throughout the geography from low to high, in terms of being able to sense. The other part of this, this is not the question you asked, but I'll turn it a little bit. I am more interested in pushing the data to the decision makers where it needs to be. So in terms of command and control and battle management, I think more of it in terms of the data is the only thing I'm truly concerned about, and getting that as far forward and I need it federated and distributed more than I need it centralized. And I appreciate what the AOCs can do, but I also recognize a vulnerability to having fixed positions. So trying to have an AOC anywhere capability to put battle managers forward, whatever that flavor of battle manager is, whether it's down at the hubs and spokes, whether it's in the AEWs, at the AETFs, it doesn't all need to be centralized necessarily back, because I think that we're going to find ourselves challenged at times to maintain our comm links and our information flow. So the more of a web approach that we have to this, the better. Over.
Okay, here's one from Robert Kraft. General, your comment on any PRC military, air, land, and sea movements outside the 9-dash line that are not widely reported by the media. The movements reported in the media are the Aleutian Islands, Philippines, Taiwan, and Japan. Are there any others in the Pacific?
Yeah, well, not just the Pacific, we continue to watch the PLA operate, further and further afield from their coastlines. In the maritime domain, we probably see more, in terms of what they're doing with their carrier force and their surface force. And they participate. Participate is too strong a word. They send maritime vessels out to do counter piracy operations, in and around the Strait of Hormuz, although they don't necessarily contribute to the international effort out there. And we do see, maritime activities in and around India and through the Straits of Malacca, and in and around Hawaii. In the air domain, again, we typically see them first and second island chain only. But again, they are continuing to build out air refueling capability. And I think again, that has not been a priority or a focus up to this point, because they recognize that their ability to operate only needs to be close to their coastline. But as they continue to build out air refueling capability, I expect that we'll see air operations further and further through the first and second island chain, and perhaps even farther over.
Okay, here's one from Doug Berkey. Tomorrow is December 7th, obviously a significant anniversary for your command. As we look to modern threats, the robust air and missile defense is crucial. What are your thoughts on how we best manifest this inadequate capacity? And how do you see roles and responsibilities for this playing out amongst the services?
Yeah, again, I can't get into a roles and responsibilities vice the services discussion necessarily. Again, I will leave that to the folks back in the Pentagon. But protection of the force applies to all of us. And going back to the earlier comments, and I think, as I look at the problem set here in the Indo-Pacific, and again, an archipelagic environment, I see a lot of overlap between what the Army USARPAC in particular and what the Air Force PACAF can do with the forces that we have, and especially as the Army continues to bring kit out into the theater in the next couple of years. So yeah, I continue to articulate back into the Pentagon, that we need more to invest more in air-based defense. I don't care who does it. I need more in air-based defense. Agile combat employment, if becomes more effective when our bases are more defended. So our ability to have agile systems that can move as we move, I think, are going to be critical going forward. Over.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, unfortunately, we've come to the end of this Aerospace Nation. And General Schneider, thanks so very much for taking the time to speak to us today, given all that's on your plate. And from all of us at the Mitchell Institute, have a great air and space power kind of day. And I'm thinking of the fact that it's evening here, but you've got a whole day ahead of you out there. So aloha, mahalo, and mele kaliki maka.
General Deptula, always great to see you. Always great to chat with you. Thanks again for this opportunity. And again, happy to link up at any time to follow up on any of these. Over.
You bet. Take care.